I need to get this out somewhere because I've been carrying it for 6 years, and the people in my life now only know the cleaned up version. So here's the whole thing. When I was 15, my parents told me we were going out to celebrate. I'd just finished my sophomore year, and my grades were fine, better than fine actually, and Tara, my mom, said we were going to dinner. I remember being excited in this pathetic way because attention from her was rare, and I'd learned to grab it whenever it showed up. Roland, my dad, drove. My younger brother Isaac was in the back with me playing on his phone. Nobody said much. I figured they were tired. We didn't go to any restaurant. Roland pulled into a gravel lot off the county road, the kind of place where there used to be a building, and now there's just weeds and a bent chain-link fence. He put it in park and told me to get out and grab my bag from the trunk. I thought maybe we were meeting someone, or the car had a problem. My bag was already packed. I hadn't packed it. Someone had gone through my room and put my stuff in a duffel while I was asleep or out, and I didn't even clock what that meant until I was standing on the gravel holding it and the car doors were locking. Tara rolled the window down. I asked what was going on, and she said the thing I've replayed maybe 10,000 times since, that they were finally free, that did I really think they wanted me around, don't bother calling? Isaac was laughing, my little brother, 13 years old, laughing like it was the funniest thing he'd seen all year. Roland didn't say anything, just looked at me in the mirror, and then they drove off. I want to explain the why here, because that's the part people never believe. It wasn't random. I was the reason Tara and Roland had to get married. She was 19 when she had me, Roland barely older, and the whole shape of their lives, the money they didn't have, the college she didn't finish, the version of themselves they thought they'd been robbed of, got hung on me from before I could talk. Isaac came 4 years later, but Isaac was wanted. Isaac was the do-over. I was the mistake with a face. They never hid it. Birthdays where Isaac got a party, and I got told we couldn't afford one that year. Being introduced to Roland's work friends as, and this one, like I was a piece of furniture with a warranty problem. I grew up understanding I was a debt somebody was still angry about. So when they left me in that lot, it wasn't a snap. It was a decision they'd clearly been building toward, and getting me out the summer before I could legally be more of a problem for them was, in their heads, just good timing. I called 20 times. Nothing. I sat on the concrete lip of that lot until it got dark, and I called Isaac's phone because he was the only one who might pick up out of curiosity, and he did, and he mocked me before he hung up. 4 hours later, Roland texted, "I still have it." He asked if I wanted a family and told me to try not being the stain they couldn't scrub out. I didn't cry, which I know sounds fake. I'd done my crying about these people years earlier. I remember sitting there thinking very clearly, one day you're going to need something and I'm going to be the one who has it and I'm going to say no. That was the whole thought. It wasn't a movie speech. It was just a fact I decided to make true. What actually happened next was boring and slow, which is the part nobody wants to hear. There was no dramatic rescue. I called my mom's older sister, my Aunt Joy, because she was the one relative who'd ever treated me like a person. She drove an hour and a half that night and picked me up off that lot, and she was furious, not at me, at them, in a quiet way that I understood even at 15 was more serious than yelling. Joy and her husband didn't have much room, and they had their own kid, my cousin Maisie, who was around my age. But Joy told me that night I'd stay with them, and she made it real. She became my guardian. She dealt with the school, the paperwork, all of it. Tara didn't fight it. That's the part that tells you everything. A mother who'd throw a fit over a parking spot signed me over to her sister without a single phone call because I was the debt getting written off and Joy was volunteering to eat the loss. Here's what I need you to understand about the years after, because it matters for what happened later. I didn't spend them healing. I know that's the word everyone reaches for. I spent them building. Living with Joy and Maisie was the first time I'd been in a house where I wasn't the problem. And instead of relaxing into it, I got sharp. I worked. I stocked shelves at a grocery store on weekends starting at 16. I kept my grades up because Joy made it clear that was the deal. And I put every dollar I didn't need into a savings account I opened the day I turned 18. Not because I was wise, because I had this constant low hum telling me that the only thing standing between me and a gravel lot was whatever I built with my own hands, and I was never going to be that kid holding a duffel bag again. Maisie and I got close, real close, more like siblings than my actual sibling ever managed. She's the one who'd stay up with me when I couldn't sleep those first few months. Joy never once made me feel like a charity case. Though I found out later, she and her husband went into some debt keeping me those years, and that fact sat in my chest the whole time. I paid attention to who showed up. Tara and Roland and Isaac had shown me exactly who they were. Joy and Maisie showed me the opposite. I filed both away. For 6 years, I heard almost nothing from my parents. A couple of times, Tara texted around the holidays, not apologies, just these weird casual check-ins like, "Hope you're doing okay," with no acknowledgement of anything. As if she'd dropped me at a friend's house and lost track of time for 6 years. I didn't answer. Isaac never reached out at all. I heard through Joy, who still talked to Tara occasionally because that's a whole complicated sister thing I won't get into here, that things over there had gotten tighter. Roland had bounced between jobs. They'd borrowed against the house. Isaac, the golden do-over, had turned into a 19-year-old who'd wrecked one car and was working on a second. The version of freedom they'd celebrated in that parking lot hadn't exactly panned out. I won't pretend I didn't feel something hearing that, but it wasn't sadness. I finished school, I kept working, and by 21, I had something they didn't. No debt, money saved, a steady job with room to grow, and a name that a couple of people in our extended family had started using in a specific way, as in, if something needed handling, if someone reliable needed to co-sign something or be listed as responsible, I was the one who came up. That reputation isn't nothing. In a family where half the adults are a mess, being the young guy who has his stuff together is a kind of quiet power, and I'd built it on purpose. I knew, the way you know weather is coming, that eventually Tara and Roland were going to run out of road, and remember they had an oldest son who'd somehow turned out fine. I didn't know the specifics. I just knew the shape of it, and I decided a long time ago what I'd do when it came. Then this spring, it came. Joy called me, actually called, which she never does, she texts, and told me Tara and Roland were in real trouble, the kind with a deadline on it, and that they were going to reach out to me, and she wanted me to hear it from her first so I wouldn't be blindsided. I told her I wouldn't be blindsided. I told her I'd been waiting 6 years. I'm going to post the rest in updates because it got long and because honestly, I want to tell it right. But that's the setup. That's who these people are and what they did. The next part is what they needed, and the part after that is what I said. Update 1. Okay, a lot of you asked me to just get to it, so here's the part where I explain what kind of trouble Tara and Roland were actually in, and how the first real conversation went, because it did not go the way any of them planned. First, I have to back up to what Joy told me on that call, because I want to be fair and lay out the facts the way I got them, not the way I wish they were. Joy and Tara still talked maybe once a month, sister stuff, and over the winter, Joy had picked up that things at my parents' place had gone from tight to bad. The short version is the house. Years back, when they were still riding the high of being free, Tara and Roland had borrowed against it, a second loan, the kind you take when you want money now, and you tell yourself the future is somebody else's problem. Then Roland's work dried up. He'd been doing okay for a stretch, then not, then a job that paid less, than a stretch of nothing. They'd been limping on Tara's income and whatever Roland pieced together, and they'd fallen far enough behind that the bank had started the process that ends with you not owning your house anymore. There was a date attached to it. That's the deadline Joy meant. And here's the piece that made my parents suddenly remember they had an oldest son. To pull themselves out, to refinance, to consolidate, to do the one financial move that would stop the clock. They needed someone with clean credit and steady income to go on the paperwork with them. A co-signer, a responsible party, somebody a lender would actually trust, because Tara and Roland at this point were trusted by exactly no one. And who in this family had spent 6 years quietly building himself into the reliable one, the guy who had his stuff together, no debt, money in the bank, the name that came up when something needed handling, me, the stain, the mistake with a face. The debt they'd written off in a gravel lot was now the only asset that could save them, and they knew it. I want to be honest about how I felt when Joy laid this out, because I've had people in the comments assume I was shocked or hurt. I wasn't. I'd been picturing some version of this for 6 years. The specifics were new. I hadn't known it to be the house, hadn't known it to be a cosign, but the shape of it was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Somebody was going to need something only I had, and I was going to be the one to decide. I remember standing in my kitchen while Joy talked, and I just felt this cold, level calm, like a thing I'd set up a long time ago had finally clicked into place. I told Joy I already knew what I was going to do. She got quiet and said she wasn't calling to push me one way or the other, that whatever I decided she was behind me, but that she wanted me to hear it from her before Tara did what Tara does. I asked what that meant. She said, "Watch, she'll come at you like nothing ever happened." She was right within the week. The first contact was a text from Tara, and Joy had called it exactly. No apology, no, I know we have a lot to talk about. It was this warm, chatty message, like we texted all the time, like the last 6 years were a scheduling gap. She said she'd love to see me, that it had been too long, that she'd been thinking about me and wondering how I was doing, and could we get together and catch up. Reading it, I actually laughed, because there it was, the exact move. She wanted to catch up. 6 years after telling me they were finally free of me, she wanted to catch up. Now here's where I did something a lot of you are going to question, and I get it. I said yes. I did not block her, I did not ignore her, I did not send some scorched earth paragraph. I said yes, let's meet, and I want to explain why, because it wasn't weakness, and it wasn't me softening. I said yes because I'd waited 6 years for this exact conversation, and I was not going to let it happen over text, where she could control it, and I could never see her face. I wanted to be in the room. I wanted to hear her ask, out loud with her own mouth. I'd earned that, and I wasn't giving it up. We met on a Thursday evening at a diner off the highway about halfway between us, one of those places with the laminated menus and the coffee that never stops coming. I got there first, on purpose, and took a booth in the back facing the door so I'd see them walk in. And when they did, Tara and Roland both, which I hadn't been sure about, the first thing that hit me was how much older they looked. Not in a looked small in a hospital bed way, I just mean 6 years is 6 years and it had not been kind to either of them. Roland had put on weight and lost hair. Tara had this smile fixed on her face the second she spotted me, this big performance of a smile, arms coming out for a hug like we were doing that. I didn't stand up. I just said, sit down. And she did. And the hug thing died in the air. And that was the first moment I think both of them understood this wasn't going to be what they'd rehearsed. The first 20 minutes were unbelievable, and I mean that literally. I could not believe I was sitting through it. Tara ran the whole script. How good it was to see me. How grown up I looked. How proud she was. She actually said proud. Of how well I'd done for myself. Roland chimed in with this gruff agreement, nodding along, calling me son a couple times, which he had genuinely never done when I lived under his roof. They asked about my job. They asked where I was living. They performed being interested in my life with the enthusiasm of people who had never once been interested in my life, and I just let them. I answered short. I sipped my coffee. I let them dig, because every minute they spent pretending we were a warm family reunion was a minute they were making my point for me. Tara kept circling. She'd bring up some memory from when I was little, some sanded-down version of my childhood where we were close, where she was a good mom, and she'd look at me to co-sign the memory, to nod and say, yeah, good times. I didn't nod. At one point, she talked about how hard those early years were for all of us, how young she and Roland had been, how they'd been just kids trying to figure it out, and that's the closest either of them came, that whole night, to acknowledging anything, reframing throwing their teenage son out of a car as we were young and it was hard for everyone. Not for me, apparently, for everyone. I finally asked the question I knew the answer to. I put my cup down and I said, so what do you actually need? Just like that. And you should have seen the look that went between them, because they'd clearly planned to work up to it slowly, over the course of a nice long reconciliation. And here I was, skipping to the last page. Roland took it. He leaned in and did this whole man-to-man thing, like we were two adults who understood how the world works, and he laid out the house situation, the loan, the job that fell through, the deadline. He was careful about it, smart even. He didn't grovel. He framed it like an opportunity for me, like this was a chance to help the family, to do the right thing, and this is the part that told me they'd thought about it. He made a point of saying they knew things hadn't always been perfect between us, and that this could be a fresh start, a clean slate, help them save the house, and we could all put the past behind us and be a family again. Like the cosign was them offering me something. Like my clean credit was the price of admission, back into a family I'd been thrown out of. And Tara jumped in on top of it, because she could see my face wasn't doing what she wanted, and she started in on how I was the only one who could do this, the only one responsible enough, the only one who'd made something of himself, and wasn't that proof that everything had worked out, that maybe it was all for the best? Look how strong it made me. She actually tried that. That leaving me in a lot at 15 was, in a way, the reason I turned out so capable, and now I could use that capability to help them. She said Isaac couldn't do it. Isaac was a mess. Isaac had nothing, but I did, because I was the strong one. The exact kid they'd thrown away for being a burden was now being told he was the strong one, the responsible one, the only one who could carry the family, and could I please carry them? I asked about Isaac, actually, because I was curious how they'd handle it. I asked if he even knew they were talking to me. Tara got a little cagey. She said Isaac knew things were bad but wasn't in a place to help. Then she caught herself and pivoted to how Isaac had always looked up to me, which was such a specific lie that I almost laughed again. This is the kid who laughed at me through a car window and told me not to call back. But I filed it, because it told me they hadn't come as a united front. This was Tara and Roland's play. Isaac was somewhere in the background, probably aware his brother was the family's last hope, and probably not thrilled about it. And I made a note to find out where he actually stood, because I wasn't done gathering the full picture before I did what I came to do. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing that kept me level that whole night, was how none of it was an apology. 2 hours in that booth, and not one time did either of them say they were sorry. Not for the lot, not for the text, not for 6 years of silence, not for Isaac laughing. The closest was, it wasn't always perfect, and we were young. Because in their heads, there was nothing to apologize for. I'd been the problem, they'd solved the problem, and now the problem had turned into a solution, and they were simply here to collect. That's the reason they treated me the way they always had. Not hatred, exactly, but this bone-deep belief that I existed to be useful to them or to be gone, and that my only two acceptable states were burden or asset. For 15 years, I was a burden. Now, I was an asset. To them, that wasn't a contradiction. It was just me finally being worth something. I told them I'd think about it. I said I needed to look at the numbers, understand what I'd actually be signing, that it was a big thing to put my name on, and I wasn't going to do it over a diner table. All of which was true, and all of which was also me buying the time I needed, because I wanted to know exactly how deep they were in, and exactly how much this fresh start of theirs depended on me before I gave my answer. Roland liked that. He read it as the responsible son being responsible, taking it seriously, and he clapped me on the shoulder on the way out like we'd made a deal. Tara hugged me and I let her this time, arms at my sides, because it didn't cost me anything, and it kept them believing I was coming around. I drove home, and I sat in my car in the lot outside my building for a long time, not upset, just thinking, because I now knew the whole shape of it. I knew what they needed, I knew they had no other option, and I knew the deadline. What I needed before I gave them my answer was to understand a couple more things. Where Isaac stood, and exactly how much of their last hope was riding on me. I found out both, and that's the next part. Update 2. So after the diner, I told my parents I needed time to look at the numbers, and I meant it. But I also had 2 things I wanted to nail down before I gave them anything. One was where Isaac actually stood, because Tara had gotten cagey about him, and I don't trust cagey. The other was how completely their whole plan rested on me, whether I was one option or the only option. I wanted the full picture before I did what I'd been planning to do for 6 years, because I wasn't going to fumble it by acting on half the facts. Isaac first, because that's the one that ate at me. Here's the thing about Isaac that I've been sitting with. When they threw me out, he was 13, and he laughed. For years I told myself 13 is a kid, kids copy their parents, maybe he didn't understand. But then I'd remember the specific sound of him laughing through that window, and the fact that when I called his phone from that lot, he picked up just to mock me, and I'd think, no, he knew exactly what was happening, and he enjoyed it. He'd grown up watching Tara and Roland treat me like the family debt and him like the family treasure, and he'd absorbed the lesson completely. I was the one it was okay to hurt. So I didn't reach out to Isaac expecting a reunion. I reached out because I wanted to hear from him directly whether anything had changed or whether he was still that kid. I had his number, Joy had it, family stuff, and I texted him, kept it flat, said I'd talked to Mom and Dad, I knew about the house, and I wanted to talk to him before I decided anything. He left me on red for most of a day, then called me that night. And I let it ring a couple times before I picked up, not for drama, I just needed a second to get level, because the last time I'd heard his voice it was laughing at me. The call was long, maybe 40 minutes, and it was not what I expected, which I'll explain, but not in a way that let anybody off the hook. Isaac led with attitude. Right away, he wanted to know why Mom and Dad were going to me, of all people, like it offended him, like even now the idea that I was the one with something worth having didn't sit right, and I found that interesting, so I let him talk. He complained about the house situation like it was happening to him personally, how stressful it was, how Mom wouldn't stop crying, how Dad was impossible to be around. Not one word about how any of it was his parents' own doing. It was all just weather that had rolled in on top of poor Isaac. I asked him straight, did he think I should do it? Should I put my name on a loan to save the house he'd grown up in and I'd been thrown out of? And this is where it got real, because Isaac, who is not a smart guy but is an honest when cornered guy, went quiet for a second and then said the thing underneath everything. He said I owed them. That was his actual position. After everything they'd done for me, and he said that, everything they'd done for me, the least I could do was help now that I could. In his head, growing up in that house was a gift I'd received and skipped out on paying for. The years of being the mistake, the parties I didn't get, the introduction as this one, the gravel lot, none of that entered his math. To Isaac, I was family who'd landed on his feet and was now being asked to kick a little back to the people who raised me, and refusing would make me the selfish one. I asked him if he remembered the lot, point blank. I asked if he remembered laughing, and there was this long pause, and then he did something I didn't expect. He didn't deny it, and he didn't apologize either. He said he was a kid, that he didn't really get it, that Mom and Dad had told him I was going to live with Aunt Joy, and it was a good thing, and everybody was happier that way. Which, think about that. They didn't even present it to their 13-year-old as abandoning me. They packaged it as good news. He grew up believing the story that I'd gone off to a better place and the family was better for it, and he'd never once questioned it, because questioning it would mean looking at his parents, and himself, honestly. When I pushed, when I said, Isaac, they drove me to an empty lot and threw my bag out and left me there at night. He got defensive and said I was making it sound worse than it was, that I always did that I always had to be the victim. There it was, the family line. I was the one with the problem for remembering it accurately, but here's what I actually got out of that call, the useful part. Isaac had no intention of helping and no ability to. He confirmed it himself, ranting. He had his own debt. He'd wrecked cars, he couldn't get approved for a pack of gum, and he was living at the house, rent-free, and had no plan to change that. So, the picture snapped into focus. Isaac wasn't a cosigner, Isaac was a dependent. He was living in the house that was about to be lost, contributing nothing, and his entire strategy for not becoming homeless was that his big brother, the mistake, the stain, would ride in and sign the papers. Isaac needed me to save the house as badly as our parents did, and he resented me for it the whole time he was on the phone. He wanted the rescue, and he wanted to keep looking down on the guy providing it. That's who he still was. I got off that call completely calm. Isaac had just told me, without meaning to, that I wasn't one option among several. I was load-bearing for the entire family. Take me out and the whole thing came down. The second thing I wanted, how deep they really were. I got over the following couple of weeks, and I want to be honest that some of it came through Joy, because Joy was still talking to Tara, and Tara could not stop talking about the house. I didn't have to snoop or scheme. Tara volunteered everything to her sister because Tara genuinely believed I was coming around, and she was already spending the relief out loud. Through Joy, I learned the deadline was real and close. I learned they'd already tried the obvious moves. Roland had asked around, they'd been turned down by lenders, they'd even floated the idea to a couple of other relatives who'd said no. I was not the first call, I was the last one. By the time Tara texted me wanting to catch up, they'd already exhausted every other door, and I was what was left. The strong one, the responsible one, the only one. Joy, I should say, was going through her own version of this, and I don't want to flatten her into just my source of information, because that's not fair to her. Joy loved her sister in that exhausting way you love family you can't fix. She was caught in the middle, and she hated it. She told me more than once that she wasn't going to tell me what to do, that after what they did, she'd understand whatever I chose. But I could hear how much she wanted the house not to be lost. Not for Tara's sake exactly, but because Joy is the kind of person for whom a family losing a house is a tragedy no matter who the family is. At one point, she asked me, carefully, if there was any version where I helped but protected myself, and I told her the truth, which is that there wasn't, because I'd looked at it. I'd actually done the responsible son homework I'd told them I'd do. And that homework is the thing I need you to understand because it's the whole hinge of what I decided. I looked hard at what co-signing actually meant. Co-signing that loan didn't mean I was helping. It meant I was legally on the hook for a debt taken on by two people with a demonstrated decades-long pattern of not paying what they owed and not caring who got stuck with it. If Roland lost the next job, and Roland always lost the next job, the payments became mine. My clean credit, the thing I'd spent 6 years building out of nothing, the only wall between me and being that kid with the duffel bag again, would be tied directly to the reliability of the two people who once decided I was a debt worth abandoning. They weren't asking me to save the house. They were asking me to hand them the one thing I'd built and trust them with it. The same people, the exact same people. So somewhere in those weeks, sitting with all of it, I made the decision I'd honestly made 6 years earlier on the curb of that lot. I was not going to sign. But, and this is the part I want to be careful about, because a lot of you have been telling me to just ghost them, block them, disappear. I wasn't going to just vanish either. That's not what I wanted. Vanishing would let them tell themselves a story, that I was cold, that I was punishing them, that I was the problem, same as always. I didn't want to be a story they got to write. I wanted them to hear the answer, clearly, in a way they couldn't reframe, from the person they'd thrown away at the exact moment they needed him most. I wanted them to understand precisely what they'd lost, and precisely why, and then I wanted to be done. So I decided how I was going to say no, not in the diner, not over text where Tara could twist it. I was going to put it in writing, in my words, and I was going to deliver it myself, to the house they were about to lose, the house I grew up being a burden in. And then I was going to walk away and let the deadline do what deadlines do. No scheme, no trick, just my clean final answer, on their porch, on my terms. I wrote the letter over about 3 nights. I'm going to tell you what was in it, and what happened when I left it, and what they did after, because they did do something after. 83 times, actually. That's the last part. Final update. When I was 15, my family drove me to an empty lot and left. 6 years later, they needed me to save their house. Here's what I did. This is the last one. Thank you to everyone who followed along, and to the people who kept telling me I didn't owe these people anything. You were right, and part of why I'm posting the ending is so I can say that out loud one more time. So, the letter. I told you I wrote it over 3 nights, and I want to explain why it took 3 nights, because it wasn't that I couldn't find the words. It was that I kept catching myself writing too much. The first draft was pages. It had everything. The parties I didn't get, this one, the introduction to Roland's coworkers like I was defective furniture, the packed duffel bag I didn't pack, the sound of Isaac laughing, the 4-hour wait on the curb, the text about the stain. I'd been carrying all of it for 6 years, and it wanted out. But I read it back, and I realized that a long letter was exactly what they'd want, because a long letter is emotional, and emotional they could work with. Tara could cry over a long letter and call me troubled and hurting and make herself the mother of a wounded son. A long letter would become, in their hands, proof that I never got over it, that I was still that angry kid, that the real problem was me and my inability to move on. So I cut it down, and down, until what was left was short and flat and impossible to twist. I told them I'd looked at the numbers, like I said I would. I told them that co-signing meant putting my name and my credit on a debt owned by 2 people who'd spent my entire childhood treating me as a burden, and then, at 15, driven me to a gravel lot, thrown my bag out, and left me there. And I wrote it exactly like that, the plain facts, no adjectives, because the facts don't need help. I told them that I'd spent 6 years building the one thing they were now asking me to hand back to them, and that I decided I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to sign. Not to save the house, not for a fresh start, not because I was the strong one. I told them the answer was no, and that it was final, and that I didn't want to be contacted about it again. And then, this is the only line I let myself keep from all those pages. I wrote that 6 years ago, Roland had asked me if I wanted a family, and told me to try not being the stain they couldn't scrub out. And that I'd thought about that question for 6 years. And my answer was that I did want a family, and I'd found one, and it wasn't them. That was it. That was the whole letter. I drove out to the house on a Saturday morning, early, because I did not want a scene, and I did not want a conversation. Understand, I'd already had the conversation. I'd sat across from them in that diner and let them make their whole case. The fresh start, the strong one, the only one who could. I'd talked to Isaac for 40 minutes and heard his case too, that I owed them. They'd all had their say. Nobody in that family ever once said they were sorry, in any of it, across 2 hours and 40 minutes and 6 years, and I'd stopped waiting for it. So I wasn't going out there to talk. I was going out there to deliver an answer to people who'd already been heard. I pulled up to the house I grew up being a burden in. It looked smaller and more tired than I remembered. Paint going, the yard let go. I walked up to the porch, the same porch, and I put the letter down where they'd see it, weighted it with a rock so it wouldn't blow off, and I walked back to my car. I did see a light on inside. I did think, for a second about the fact that Tara or Roland or Isaac was in there, maybe 40 feet away, and that I could knock. I didn't knock. Knocking was for people who wanted something. I got in my car and I drove home, and I want to tell you I felt some huge wave of something, but mostly I just felt level, finished, like setting down a bag I'd been holding since I was 15. They found it. I know they found it because of what came next. The first call started that afternoon. Tara first. I didn't answer. Then Roland. I didn't answer him either. And here's where I have to tell you what I mean when I say 83 messages, because it's not an exaggeration for the post. Over about 2 days, my phone lit up with texts and voicemails and missed calls from both of them. And I sat and I read every single one, because I'd waited 6 years and I was not going to look away now. They came in stages, and the stages tell you everything about these people. The first ones were warm, almost Tara writing like we'd had a misunderstanding, like the letter was me being dramatic and we could just talk it through, sweetheart, call me, let's not do it this way. When that got no response, the tone turned. Roland sent this long one about responsibility, about how a real man doesn't abandon his family, which, the man who left his son in a lot lecturing me about abandonment, I read that one twice just to appreciate it. Then came the ones where Tara tried the childhood again, the good memories. Please remember we love you. We always loved you. As if love was a word you could just assert into being after 6 years of silence. Then the guilt. Isaac's gonna be on the street. Do you want that on your conscience? Your brother? Your family? Then, when none of it moved me, they turned to anger. That I was cruel. That I was heartless. That I'd always been difficult. That this was who I really was. Same family line, all the way to the end. If I wouldn't be their asset, I was back to being the problem. There was no third category for me. There never had been. And then, near the end of the 2 days, the tone broke completely. And this is the part the title of this whole thing came from. Roland sent a run of messages. I counted, it was a lot of the 83 that were just pure panic. No more lectures, no more guilt, no more a real man. Just please, please, we'll do anything. We'll make it right. We'll do whatever you want. Please just call. Please. The man who told me to try not being the stain they couldn't scrub out was texting me, please, we'll do anything. And I read all of them, every one, and I understood something standing in my kitchen that I'd been trying to understand for 6 years, which is that they were never going to apologize because they were sorry. Even now, even in we'll do anything, there was no sorry. There was please, and there was we'll do anything. But there was never, once, I'm sorry for what we did to you. Because to say that they'd have had to believe they'd done something to me, and they didn't. In their world, I was a resource that had stopped cooperating. We'll do anything didn't mean we're sorry. It meant please start being useful again. I did not respond. Not to any of the 83. I want to be clear about that because people keep asking if I sent some final devastating text, some mic drop. I didn't. The letter was the last thing they'd ever get from me, and it was already said. Anything after that would have been me still being in the conversation, still available, still a person they could work on. Silence was the answer. My silence was the thing they'd chosen for me in that lot. Don't call again, they'd said. And 6 years later, I finally gave it to them. I did text Isaac once, actually, since I'm being honest. Not the parents. Isaac. He'd sent his own messages by then. Less panicked, more sullen. This, you're really doing this? You're really going to let this happen? I can't believe you. Energy. Still not one word of acknowledgement for the lot, for the laughing, for any of it. And I sent him back one line. I told him I'd sat on a curb for 4 hours the night he laughed at me. And now he could figure out where he was going to sleep, and we were even. Then I was done with him too. The deadline passed. They lost the house. I know because Joy told me, and I want to end on Joy, because she's the one who matters in all this. Joy called me after, and she wasn't angry at me. She'd told me from the start she'd stand by whatever I chose, and she did. She was sad, the way she'd been sad about the whole thing, because that's who Joy is. But she also told me something I've held on to. She said she'd watched them hand me to her at 15 without a fight, like signing away a problem, and that she'd never understood how anyone could look at a kid and see a debt. She said she was glad I'd found a family, because I had. Joy and Maisie were at my place 2 weekends later, Maisie giving me a hard time about my terrible coffee, the three of us just normal. That's the family Roland asked me if I wanted. I have it. It was never going to include him, People in the comments keep framing this as revenge, and I've thought about that word a lot. It doesn't feel like revenge to me. Revenge would have been going out of my way to hurt them. I didn't do anything to them. I just didn't save them. Everything that happened to that house, they built themselves over years by being exactly who they were. I just declined to be the wall between them and the natural end of their own choices. The strongest thing I did was nothing. They needed me. For the first time in their lives, they genuinely needed me, and I got to be the one who decided, and I decided the same thing they decided about me in that lot. I chose to be free of them. 6 years ago, my dad asked if I wanted a family and told me to try not being the stain they couldn't scrub out. I found a family, and I turned out to be the one thing they couldn't get back.